You know, it's a story that goes from secret handshakes to the very brink of all-out war. We're talking about two of the Middle East's biggest powers, Israel and Iran, who are now locked in one of the most dangerous standoffs on the planet. So let's unravel how these two nations went from being partners to absolute archenemies. And we're going to start right in the middle of the action, with a conflict that drags a decades-long shadow war right out into the open, and in the process, changes the rules of the game forever. I want you to imagine this. It's June 2025. What everyone is calling the 12-day war has just exploded onto the scene. It's short, it's brutal, and it has the entire world holding its breath. Why? Because for the first time ever, these two aren't fighting through their usual proxies anymore. They are fighting each other directly. And Iran's response? It's massive. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, unleashes the largest missile campaign in its entire history. We're talking over 550 ballistic missiles screaming towards Israeli cities. Air raid sirens basically become the daily soundtrack from Haifa all the way down to Tel Aviv. Israel's counterattack, codenamed Operation Rising Lion, well, it's absolutely devastating. Just in the first day, stealth fighters hit more than 150 sites deep inside Iran. They're targeting everything: IRGC command centers, and most critically, very sensitive nuclear facilities. And the human cost? Wow, it's just stark. The war was brief, but it was bloody. You're looking at an estimated 610 people killed in Iran, with 28 fatalities in Israel. The shadow war? Yeah, that's over. The grim reality of direct conflict had arrived. But here is the crazy part. It wasn't always like this, not even close. Believe it or not, these two nations were once quiet partners. So that's the big question, right? How in the world did they become arch enemies willing to risk this level of total devastation? That's the puzzle we're here to solve. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind the clock. Let's journey back to a time of some pretty surprising cooperation, a time that honestly feels like a completely different universe from where we are today. I mean, we're talking a complete 180. Before 1979, when the Shah was in power, Iran and Israel were actually strategic allies. It was all part of Israel's periphery doctrine, basically making friends with non-Arab countries to balance out common threats like Egypt and the Soviet Union. Think about it. They had shared oil pipelines. Their intelligence agencies, you've got the Mossad and Savak, they were actually working together. They even had joint military projects. So what happened? One single event, the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It was the political earthquake that changed everything. Ayatollah Khamenei's new theocratic regime, well, it just completely flipped the script. Israel, which was once a partner, was suddenly an ideological enemy. It was branded the Little Satan, an illegitimate state and an extension of Western power. All diplomatic ties severed literally overnight. Now, to really grasp why this hostility is so baked in, you have to look at how Iran is actually run. It's a unique power structure, so we have to ask, who really calls the shots in Tehran? Look, power in Iran isn't your typical flowchart. At the very top, you've got the supreme leader, who has the final say on everything. But the real engine of the state, the real power player here, is the IRGC. It's not just an army. It's a parallel army, it's an intelligence agency, and it's a massive economic empire, all rolled into one. And it's loyal only to the supreme leader. That means the elected president and parliament, the people that Iranians actually vote for, have very little real say over the country's military or its most powerful economic players. And what you end up with is this really interesting paradox, what one historian called a strong state with a weak society. Basically, the regime poured immense power into these unelected bodies like the IRGC. This created a powerful state machine that's way stronger than its own elected government, and frankly, stronger than the will of its own people. And this internal power structure, this top-heavy dynamic, that's the fuel for the 4-decade-long shadow war that eventually just exploded into the open. So what was the IRGC's big plan all this time? You can actually see it right here on the map. Their goal was to export the revolution and directly challenge Israel by building what's known as the Shia Crescent. It's this land bridge stretching through Iraq and Syria, used to supply and arm proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. They were effectively creating a ring of fire right on Israel's borders. So for decades, right, this proxy war is just simmering in the background. Iran arms its allies. Israel hits back with covert operations and assassinations. But then, things started to accelerate. Fast. The October 7th attack by Hamas, a longtime Iranian proxy, totally changed Israel's thinking. Then, in April 2024, Israel struck an Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing top IRGC commanders. That was a huge red line crossed. Iran's retaliation, its first ever direct missile attack on Israel, set the stage for the all-out war of 2025. So, after the ceasefire in the 12-day war, the entire region is left teetering on a knife's edge. The dust might have settled, but the ground underneath, it is super unstable, and it leaves us with some really critical questions about what comes next. And if you look inside Iran, the regime is absolutely reeling. The war was a military humiliation. Crippling sanctions have tanked the economy. On top of that, its key proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, have been seriously weakened. But maybe most important of all, massive anti-regime protests are breaking out across the country, fueled by a population just exhausted by war and economic hardship. And all of this brings us to the final, most critical question of all. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is 86 years old. The regime he's built is facing the greatest crisis in its history, squeezed by immense pressure from the outside and from within. With no clear successor agreed upon, what happens when he's gone? That uncertainty, right there, that's the real powder keg in a region that's already on fire.